dong, ding dong, ding dong, ding dong, ding. It is a perfect day.
Woke up to the sound of the garbage truck again. Upstairs neighbor's toilet's leaking on my head. Cars broke down, I missed the bus, there runs a 10. I had a feeling this was a day to stay in bed. I finally left my pad right under Jumbo's cloud roof. A police officer pulled out his gun and said, I said, sir, you got the wrong guy. I guess it's just a perfect day. It's just a perfect day. Na, 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 na.
Hey guys, welcome back to Eggs. This week we have special guest Eric D. Brotman. Eric is Chief Executive Officer of BFG Financial Advisors, an independent investment firm assisting clients with wealth creation, preservation, and distribution. Eric has more than 25 years of experience in financial planning, founding his firm in Baltimore in 2003. BFG provides investment, retirement, estate, insurance, and comprehensive financial planning services for families, professionals, executives, and business owners. Eric is also the host of the amazing podcast, Don't Retire, Graduate, which is dedicated to teaching listeners how to advance into retirement rather than retreating into it. Every episode, including his appearance here, provides listeners with inspiration and actionable advice to guide them towards a seamless transition into dignified retirement. You can also find his book, Don't Retire, Graduate, available on Amazon and anywhere good books are sold. Here to talk about personal finance, destigmatizing money, and planning for a happy and healthy future, please join me in welcoming to the show our guest, Eric D. Brotman. Hey, Eric, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Ryan. Glad to be here.
Absolutely. Thrilled to have you here too. This topic in particular, just financial literacy, retirement, all these things, these are topics that I think a lot of people leave off the table until, end of career, end of life, just to find out that it was too late. And then I think, because it's like money and life and death. And like, these are the things that people don't like to talk about, right? So I think it's really important to sort of bring that to the forefront and make this a topic that, doesn't have to be so scary.
Well, or at least not so taboo. I mean, we grow up in households. I don't know about you guys, but we grow up in households where a lot of times money is not discussed. And
yeah,
it's not that
we never brought it up in our family at all. I didn't know anything about, how much the car payment was or the rent or any of that until I got out on my own and had to figure it out the hard way.
Well, and even if you have some inside knowledge, you still have to learn the behaviors.
Yeah.
Because the thing that's more powerful here is the psychology, not the numbers. The numbers just math. You can figure out the math, but making decisions, particularly when it's emotional, or when it's under duress, or when there's a sense of urgency, the pendulum swings back and forth between greed and fear. And, in the late 90s, there was all that talk about your neighbors are getting rich. Why aren't you? And, fast forward to 2008 and it's, we're never going to get through this. We're never going to survive this recession.
Yeah.
And, so I think it's that pendulum and it's psychology.
Yeah, no,
So
I think
Eric,
it makes
can
a
you,
lot of sense. Well, and
can you
like
give
Mike
us
was saying, I grew up in a family where money wasn't something we talked about a lot. It was just me and my mother. She was a single mom, a teacher. So not like, the highly paid, any of that kind of stuff. And so money didn't come up a lot. We didn't talk about that kind of thing. And, it's for me now, I feel like it's kind of repeating the cycle, right? Because I didn't get a lot of that. Now my kids aren't getting it either. And so that was actually one of the things I thought about, when I'd heard that you were coming on the show was, try and, improve my own literacy a little bit so I can maybe better serve those younger than me in the house.
It makes sense. And, the pendulum swings at a certain age. We wind up having to worry about our parents financially too, partly because we never talked about it all along. And I don't know that many folks who are in their 70s, 80s, and so forth, who don't have some baggage around money. Either they're embarrassed because they feel like they should be worth more and they didn't save well, or they're embarrassed because they're worth a lot of money and don't feel worthy of that, or like, there's so much that everyone's dealing with, and there's really no way to bring that up without having almost like a Venn diagram of psychoses.
Yeah.
between everybody in the conversation.
That's definitely a hard conversation to have with your parents, like figuring out their retirement, making sure they're okay, making sure that you're going to be okay, and all the I's are dotted and T's are crossed for everyone involved. Before we kind of we just got really deep really quick. Can we kind of get like a background on you, where you came from, what your history is, and how you got in the financial world?
Absolutely. I like to joke that I came into the financial world in the traditional way, which was as an English major. And so, I was a liberal arts guy. I studied English and psychology and went to work out of college at a brokerage firm in the legal department because, like all English majors, I was either going to teach or go to law school. And so I spent some time at a brokerage firm and fell in love with the financial business. And that's now 26, 27 years ago. And I got to the point where I wanted to start making a difference early on, because my initial role in the legal department there was helping people under duress. When somebody died, what do we need to do? And it was very operational, right? It was administrative. It was, here's the box to check. It was too late to help anybody make good decisions. So in other words, it was having conversations with widows saying, I'm sorry, ma'am, but you're not the beneficiary of your husband's retirement plan. Or I know you have 3 children, but only 2 of them were named. I guess you forgot to do it when you had your 3rd baby. And there was nothing I could do to help them. I could just say, this is the deal. And so I started with getting some insurance licensing and a background in estate planning, and then did all the investment licensing and so forth. And over the last 25 plus years, I've gone from someone who wanted to try and start a practice to somebody now who's running a pretty good sized company. I mean, we've got 21 people, 8 financial advisors, clients in over 30 states in the US, and a real presence. And I've used my English major because I've written 3 books. So I get to do that, and they're on finance. So I get to sort of have it all tied together a little bit.
Nice. Your latest book is Don't Retire, Graduate.
Don't Retire, Graduate. I will make a shameless plug because why not? Don't Retire, Graduate is this idea that retirement's bad for you.
Okay.
And that doesn't mean financial independence is bad for you. Anyone who says that is foolish. You of course want to reach financial independence, but retirement in its traditional sense is about retreating. It's disappearing. In fact, in the UK, the word retire means to go to bed, to go to sleep. What are you going to do? I've had a very good career and now I'm going to go to sleep. Like, that doesn't make sense. We have all of this experience and wisdom and talent. And in so many cultures, we honor our elders, right? The elders of the tribe or of the group or they're the most revered. And here they're sort of put out to pasture because they're no longer considered useful. Why? Why not figure? Yeah. Why not figure out a way to advance?
Yeah, it's funny because, like, I mean, maybe I'm just old enough, because I had grandparents that were like World War II vets, and the type of retirement they went through was exactly that, right? It was sort of a retreat. They worked their butt off for 45 years, 50 years, whatever, and then they decided to retire and they were done. And I see that even to some degree with like my own parents, for example, right? My mom is in her late 50s, early 60s, excuse me, and she's doing great and just retired. And, it's a little bit different for her. She's doing a little bit of running around and things like that. But as it pertains to work, still kind of just stepping out of the spotlight. Right. Mm-hmm. And so, but it seems like with, just sort of the transition in society and all these things, like, I mean, we're all living longer and life is of good quality later and, things like that. So it makes sense that the standard, whatever we want to call it, the traditional version of retirement has got to evolve.
Retirement was created in its current sense in the 1800s. Otto von Bismarck created this, and he was a guy who essentially said we need to find a way to get people to be dismissed into their retirements. He literally wanted to find a way to get rid of people in the government and in the public sector and in the workforce. This is almost 200 years ago, and it hasn't changed a lot. Because his definition was after 40, you're on the downside, and by 60, you're not useful.
Well, isn't it? I mean, lifespans have extended a lot too. So, I mean, in that 200 years, add 10, 15 years to an average lifespan, that's 10, 15 years you could be productive in doing.
And those years, all those living years, you were, on the farm, you were working yourself to the bone. I mean, you were not in great physical condition by the time you hit 65 either.
And that's true. But even now, you can claim Social Security at 62. 62 in the 1930s, when Social Security came to be, 62 was old. People didn't live past 70 a whole lot. So you would work, and you hit the workforce at 18. People weren't going to college. They were getting jobs out of high school. So you work from 18 to 62 or 65. You get your pension. Those are mostly gone. You get your Social Security. You save a little bit of money. The rule of thumb then was you need to save enough to pay for 10% of your expenses. 10. Now it's more like 80 or 90.
Yeah.
And then at 70, you were dead. Well, today we don't hit the workforce till 22, 23, 25 with grad school and other things. Forget the fact that we're also $100,000 in debt for undergraduate school. Like, you're not even hitting the runway even. You're hitting it in a hole, right?
Yeah.
And
I hate that I laughed when you said that, because it's not a laughing matter. It's actually quite depressing. I went to school for an associate's degree and I'm almost $40,000 in debt. And it's ridiculous that, you can't even really, how do you recover from that with, it's really sad. I have another friend that's about 60 to 70 grand in student debt. And she just had a major medical expense that came and knocked her another 80 grand in debt. So it's like, how do you move forward from that, coming out of college, and try to rebound? And when most people, they're coming, and that kind of expense is a house, their first house. And they're actually, it's
and they're not doing it.
Yeah.
And part of it's because they can't. We can talk about student loans all day. Ultimately, in my opinion, a lot of these young people were sold a bill of goods that education was always worth whatever you paid for it, and that you'd come out and make so much more money that it's the greatest investment ever. And that can be true in certain industries. If you're a mechanical engineer, or if you're going to med school, maybe. But for a lot of folks, all it is a ticket to an entry-level job, and not always that.
Yeah, I actually was just listening to one of your podcasts about a doctor that it was your most recent one. And I was about 10 minutes in. I was listening to it before this started, and you jumped on right as I was getting into the good part. But can you break that down? It sounded like he was getting ready to kind of get out of the medical career altogether.
Oh, not that he was ready to. He did. I
Okay.
mean, and a really neat guy. And what he said, he realized that money was a lot like oxygen, which I thought was an interesting thing. I never heard it put this way, but what he said is, money's like oxygen. When you have enough, you don't think about it. When you don't have enough, it's all you think about. And so there's this mentality of either an abundance mentality or a shortage, right?
Yeah.
And so if you have enough oxygen to live, a little bit more in the room is rarely going to make a difference to you. And the same thing's true with money. We've been working with families for a quarter century, and I've seen people who have enormous incomes by any reasonable standard, and put together almost no net worth or no nest egg at all. And I've seen other folks who have what I think anyone would agree is a very middle-class income build enormous wealth. That's behavior. It's not just math. And so, if you spend more than you make, it doesn't matter how much you make. You're not going to get wealthy. You're not going to get financially independent. It doesn't matter what you earn. If you are spending more than you make, there's a hole in the bottom of your bucket bigger than the spout at the top. It won't work.
So on that note, what are some steps that people should take throughout their life, different phases of life, to lead to financial independence?
Great question. And I think that the number one thing, if there's one takeaway from today's show and people start doing one thing that will make a difference, it's something I refer to as paying yourself first.
Okay.
And what that means is that no matter how much you earn, figure out a percentage of that income and put it away for your own benefit, long-term and so forth, before you spend anything, before you budget anything. First of all, nobody likes to budget. In fact, my next podcast guest wrote a book called Budgeting Doesn't Have to Suck. And I'm prepared to argue with them about that. But at the end of the day, there's no matter what you earn, if you can live on 85% or 80% or 92%, whatever it is, of what you make, you will start building wealth. But what people do is they spend all the money that comes in, and then they hope to have some left over at the end of the month. And some months they do, and some months they don't. And that means savings is accidental because they're used to living on 100% and hoping something's left. If you live on 85% and every time you get a raise, you continue to live on 85%, you'll still improve your standard of living, but you'll also be in a habit that builds real significant sustainable wealth. So paying yourself first before you pay a car payment, a mortgage payment, anything, before you take on any debt or any obligation, assume that you're earning less than 100% of what you're actually earning gross.
Yeah, no, I think that's smart, and I've heard similar ideas before. Now, I guess my question would be then a sort of maybe logical next step is, okay, now I've got this coffee can full of cash that I've been sitting on for a little while.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I've got 10 grand shelled away, and that's great. That's more savings than I've ever had in my life. But now what do I do with it? I mean, I'm sure that having the cash is better than having no money whatsoever. But I mean, there's got to be ways to grow that money too.
Absolutely. And some of them aren't necessarily the first things that come to mind. I mean, I tell people when you build your financial castle, you have to dig a moat around it first. You've got to have a risk management plan. Some of that is an emergency fund. Have that 10 grand sitting aside in case in case you suddenly need 4 tires or a washer and dryer or a medical expense. Have that so that you're not one surprise away from tapping Visa, right? But beyond that, then you get into some of the different types of vehicles that are out there. And a lot of times that starts with a retirement plan. Well, if you work for a company that has a 401k and they're making matching contributions or some kind of employer contributions on the 401k, let's say that your employer says, if you put away up to 6% of what you earn, we'll match 50 cents on the dollar for you. So you put 6% in and they match 3%. That's an immediate return on your investment. No matter what you own, no matter what funds you hold, you're immediately getting what is a tax deferred raise from your employer. Take the money. Same thing's true with health savings accounts. There are ways where sometimes employers make matching contributions or make employer contributions. Take them, build them. Some of the strategies that are important are the ones not only to figure out how to grow wealth, but then how to keep it, because taxes are a very significant player in this conversation. And it's a hot potato, both politically and legislatively, but also socially. There's tax decisions that need to be made. For example, if you're a 30-year-old professional and your company's got this 401k and you have the ability to participate in it, a lot of times you get to choose between the traditional 401k and the Roth 401k. Well, doing the Roth means using after-tax dollars to fund it. You say, well, why would I give up a tax deduction? And the short answer is you'd be giving up a tax deduction while you're in a relatively modest tax bracket with the idea that you'd then grow the money for 30 years and have a much larger tax bracket and a much larger piece of dollars coming out that you wouldn't have to pay taxes on. So it's not just kicking it down the road and saying, oh, I don't have to pay taxes on this for 30 years. That's true, but the tax bill that comes might be dramatically bigger than the one that you saved.
Yeah, that makes complete sense. I would have never thought of that.
So some of it's tax arbitrage. You want to take deductions. Yeah. You want to take deductions when you're in the high brackets, and you want to find tax-free income when you're in that high bracket situation. On the flip side, if you're in a lower bracket, you don't need a tax deduction. 90% of people in this country don't even itemize their taxes anymore, which means things like mortgage interest, charitable giving, things that used to be no-brainer deductions aren't deductions for most people anymore. And I don't think that's really sunk in yet for a lot of folks. I don't think they've experienced enough tax returns to realize that the behaviors they had been taught were good behaviors by their CPA or their parents or whoever was helping when they were growing up. The rules have changed.
Well, I guess then, so if you're, let's say just because much of our audience are entrepreneurial, let's say maybe you don't work for a company. So you're running your own business, and maybe you're far enough down the road, you've got a corporation and you can, I guess, invest in your own 401k or match and do some things like that if you have the right entity figured out. But for your average entrepreneur, maybe a mom and pop shop, small operations, how do you start to look at these things? Like, how do you learn which tools are the right tools? And I think that this is one of those things, and maybe I'm wrong, maybe you can correct me, but I think that one reason that a lot of people don't invest or don't buy the right tool is actually kind of the fact that there's so much to do and I don't know anything about any of it. I know I could say, at least in my situation, I tend to be the guy that will analyze, and never actually pull the trigger because I'm busy looking at all the things, because I don't want to make the one long-term decision and choose the wrong one.
And I'm the guy that
you
will
know, as
do the
you mentioned, like
opposite.
401ks and stuff. And actually, yeah, and like Mike said, by not investing at all, I'm actually doing the opposite. But
Well,
you know,
I'm the guy that will pull the trigger on the wrong thing and waste my money doing something stupid. You know, it's just my.
Okay. Well, then the two of you become an interesting case study together.
Yeah.
The answer is, a lot of times it sounds very self-serving, but it's get some advice, get some
Yeah.
tax advice, get some legal advice, get some financial advice. If you're in business for yourself, whether you're a sole proprietor or in a partnership or you've started a corporation, most of the time those kinds of advice can be deductible expenses for the business. That's business expense.
Yeah.
And so if that's true, it does help offset or defray the cost of getting some of that advice. But the advice could be priceless. For example, if you've started a mom and pop, you called it, and you're starting to build some revenue and there's some profit, and you know you're not buying buildings per se, but you're starting to see black instead of red ink. There are things that you can do from a retirement standpoint that don't require all the work and all the expenses and all the steps like a 401k. You can fund a SEP IRA for yourself, which is a self-employed person's IRA. And, you know, we think about IRAs and we're like, well, the contribution's $6,000. That's nice, but it's not going to retire me. But with a SEP IRA, the limit is 25 cents on the dollar that you make, up to $280,000 or $290,000 that you can earn. So you can put away $50,000, $60,000 a year tax deductibly. So your limits are much higher as an entrepreneur, as a business owner. You have enormous tools in your toolbox.
well, so do you have any recommendations on finding, you know, I guess this financial advice, right? I feel like right now, you know, just as easy as it is for people to have a voice, everybody's got one. And so you've got a lot of people who have sort of, I guess, you know, stake in the game. You know, they're trying to sell their insurance policy or they're trying to move there or whatever. You know, I've worked with a couple financial advisors. I got a little bit of money when I was young from my father passed away, and I got a life insurance policy to pay for some school and things like that. And so I spent a bunch of time working with financial planners and stuff like that. But what I felt like, or what I feel like now looking back at it, you know, when there's essentially nothing left, is that there was a lot of, you know, selling me into programs that were under the umbrella of their thing, right? And because I didn't know any better, I just took the advice. And now I feel like I still, you know, having even worked one-on-one with some financial planners, don't really know anything about finance. Now I'm in a spot where I'm 40, I've got a couple kids, I've got to start shelling some dough away. And, you know, and I don't even know where to begin. And my gut would be go to a financial planner, but my experience with the financial planners are going to move me into some program that, you know, may or may not be right. Maybe it's good. Maybe they're ethical. Maybe it's totally, you know, okay, but I just won't know. Right. And so how would one, do you think, maybe kind of start this journey? Let's say, and I imagine, you know, I mean, I don't know everybody, but I know a lot of people my age that are sort of in that same boat. You know, they didn't do a lot of saving early on, you know, outside of the few that have gone and worked for a corporation somewhere who may have a 401k or something. People that are sort of my ilk and of my age don't tend to have a lot of savings and don't have a lot of, you know, plans for the future. But I think we're all hitting this point where it's like, okay, now we've got kids, now we're thinking legacy. And I've never had so much thought about legacy than in the last couple of years. And so, you know, so this is a real hot topic for me. But again, like I say, I mean, I've been trying to set aside some cash. So I've got some buckets of cash sitting around, but what do I do with that cash?
That's about a 6-part question, Ryan. So I'm gonna start.
You listen to enough of our shows, you'll see
I'm going to start one place, and maybe it's not the place you want me to, but the first thing is to acknowledge that the experience you've had is not rare, and it's one of the biggest challenges facing the financial industry. Is that for many years, and in some ways, it still is a bit of the Wild West. People call themselves financial advisors when they aren't. They're not certified, or I mean, you can come out of school and get a relatively simple license It's like getting a mortgage license or a real estate license, and all of a sudden you're an expert. That's dangerous, right? The other thing is a lot of advisors, or people who refer to themselves advisors, are actually employees of various companies. So they work for an insurance company and they're incented to use their insurance company's product off the shelf, or they work for an investment firm and they're encouraged to utilize or have clients buy the funds that their firm manufactures. And there's an inherent conflict of interest, and there's such an unbelievable lobbying effort by the big insurance companies and big financial institutions to keep it that way, because they want their salespeople, which is what they are, to be beholden more to their employer than to their client. That's horrifying, and it's not okay. So there are organizations out there. One is the CFP board, so the Certified Financial Planner Board, which created an education and created a fiduciary standard for its members. There's about, I think, 28,000 or so CFPs in the U.S. I think that's the right number. But nonetheless, there are folks who have a different level of education, a different level of experience. They don't only know insurance or a retirement plan or banking, for example, and they don't work for an employer. They only represent their clients. So there's a chapter in the new book, Don't Retire, Graduate, all about the questions to ask prospective advisors, how would you interview? If you were going to sit down with 3 or 4 advisors, what would you ask them? And what do those answers mean?
Example?
Yeah, an example is, how do you choose specialists for us to work with? Well, what do you mean? Well, do you have attorneys and accountants and real estate people and mortgage people in-house where you have to use their people? Or if I have a tax person I really like, can we use him or her? It's a big deal, because you want that objective advice. I think it's great to build a dream team of specialists and then have them know each other, but don't have them necessarily employed together. It's like checks and balances.
I actually like that a lot.
If your attorney is employed by your financial advisor, it's kind of like the fox guarding the hen house a little bit.
Well, it's like in the mortgage issue back in the day with the appraisers and the loan officers. Same deal. You don't want to deal. You don't want that.
There are conflicts everywhere in the real estate world. In fact, almost all of this has conflicts, and the ones you can't avoid. Like, for example, in the real estate world, if you have someone representing you and they're your buyer's agent, you're going to buy a house, and your agent is representing you to help you buy a house. They're also paid more based on how much house you buy. So unlike a seller's agent who's going to represent you based on how much they can get you for the house you're selling, which is great, they're incented to sell your house for more money. The buyer's agents are incented to coax you into bigger homes, and maybe not even to negotiate for the best possible deal because they want to get it done. That's a conflict. It's a clear conflict. That doesn't mean that they're bad people, but you have to be aware of it going in. You have to understand that relationship, and you have to be real clear with anyone you hire that this is what I'm doing and I'm not doing more than that. Same thing with mortgage brokers.
Well, yeah. Mortgage brokers, they'll actually, give you a little bit higher rate because they get more return on the back end. They
not
could give you
not only that, but when you ask somebody, people are going to say, how much house can I afford? That's what is the maximum. What is the maximum amount I could borrow without getting really stuck? And we've seen how that works out.
Yeah.
So if you're in a business where you're paid not based on advice, but based on some kind of product or some kind of quantifiable volume, if you're paying your mortgage advisor more to borrow $600,000 than to borrow $400,000, that's not necessarily a bad thing if you can afford the bigger home or whatever. But you got to understand that the incentives are not aligned with yours.
Yeah, no, I think that's really smart. And so I think that's great. And we'll have to check out your book and get that list of questions, because I think that is one of those things. And I think you're right. There probably exist conflicts everywhere, right? I mean, it's just life. People work with who they know and refer their friends and refer, that kind of stuff. Like I have a bookkeeper and a CPA, and we're in the process of divorcing from our CPA after a couple of years of rough performance. And we're moving to a new firm. But the person I asked was my bookkeeper. Now they're not employed together. They're totally independent, but she says, hey, this is a CPA I know and trust or whatever. And so, but she does a good job with my books. So I'm taking her at face value. Once I have an opportunity to meet him, we'll see how it all goes. But in my case, like I run a creative company, we spend a lot of time doing marketing and advertising, design, that kind of stuff. So we're in a creative business and my background is in the creative world. And so I don't think of myself as being particularly financially savvy. And I am a little bit at the whim of these people, right? I mean, now I can create my way out of anything, but I can't, I couldn't finance my way out of anything. And so, I'm a little bit at the behest or the beholden to these people to make me good recommendations. So I think having a list of questions like what you've described would be great.
Well, it's not much different than something like medicine. I mean, unless you're a doctor, you're going to go to a physician you believe has a good reputation, or maybe you've asked other people, hey, who do you use for dermatology? You're going to go see somebody, or you ask your one doctor who's a specialist I can see for a podiatry appointment. They're going to suggest somebody who may or may not be part of the same network. Those folks are then going to give you an analysis, right? A diagnosis, which you're not really in a position to argue with. You can get a second opinion, but you're not going to read the x-ray differently than the doctor necessarily and say, doc, you missed this metatarsal. Yeah. That's not, that doesn't happen.
Right.
And then they're going to give you medical advice. And sometimes it's, you need to have a surgical procedure. Well, that surgical procedure might make money for that physician's or that practice, or they're going to provide you with a prescription for a drug. And it happens to be the drug rep who showed up with deli sandwiches last week.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying people are inherently bad. I don't believe that. I actually believe people inherently, given the choice, will do the right thing most of the time.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's a good distinction to make, because I'm with you. Like, I don't think people are operating out of malice necessarily. I think, we may be either totally into it or maybe just sort of subliminally, that's the guy we know and trust because we've developed this relationship with that person. But I don't think they're generally trying to steer you down the wrong path.
No,
I mean, I'm sure you could probably find a bad case for every good case, but I think generally speaking, we're, not assuming people are trying to besmirch us, but it does make sense to be aware of the conflicts.
Well, and asking the right questions. There's such a thing as a lie by omission.
Yeah.
And a lie by omission is just something someone failed to mention. Oh, by the way.
Yeah.
If you're buying a car and, they go through all the specs and all the stuff with the car and they fail to tell you, by the way, this car has a terrible track record. The airbags don't fire.
Yeah.
You didn't ask, hey, do the airbags fire in 1 second or two, or what? You didn't ask.
Right.
So they didn't tell you.
Well, I think a lot of it comes down to having the desire to actually educate yourself. Yeah. If you don't take the step to actually try and learn a little bit on your own, you don't know what to ask your financial planner or your accountant, or, then they're not going to be able to read your mind. They're not going to be able to know what's particular about your situation that you might need help with over something else. And I think a resource like your podcast would actually be a really good thing for people to listen to. I'm going through it right now, just reading some of the headlines, and they're great things that, like understanding your employee benefits, how you can use a reverse mortgage, Dave Ramsey's debt reduction strategy. Lots of good topics that are in here, and I'm gonna go and listen to it for the next week straight, just trying to educate myself.
I love that. Binge listen, but please leave a review, will you? They make a difference.
I'll hit the like and subscribe and do all the stuff I need to do.
Binge listen and tell everyone about it.
Yeah.
So let's circle back a little bit. We started down the path a little bit of how one might achieve financial independence. And we talked about the sort of, pay yourself first strategy.
Yep.
But let's say, and we did get into this a little bit, but let's try and be a little bit more linear in how this might work if we were trying to sort of explain a process for someone to get started. So we're paying ourselves first, as you've prescribed. We've been, saving 5 or 10%, whatever we can afford to set some money aside. Got a little bit of money aside. What do you think our next step might be?
The next step, first and foremost, is to figure out what types of accounts make sense for you and why. And some of that's based on taxes. Some of it's based on access. If you want to save for a down payment on a home, you're not going to put that money in your 401k that you can't touch for 30 years. There's different kinds of accounts for different things. So I believe before you start investing anything, it's important to understand the why. What's this for? Ideally, when is this for? Because you might have 3 or 4 or 8 different accounts, and there's reasons for each of them. One of them is because you want to have an emergency fund, so it's just savings. One of them is because you want to be able to educate your kids and keep them out of the student loan disaster. And that you're going to treat that differently because your kid is 12 and he or she's going to need money in 6 years, as opposed to this is money I hope not to touch till I'm 72. And so, not every account is created equal. Not every investment is created equal. And I think it's important to have a blueprint. Think of it like building a house. It's a blueprint. What is the big picture? So if it's long-term money, you're going to treat it very differently. If you don't need to touch it for 10 years, or more, typically you're going to be able to be fairly aggressive with it. And that doesn't mean speculative. It doesn't mean take a flyer on something and hope it works out. You still want to be diverse. You want to have the right asset allocation. You want to have the right money management. You want to know what you're paying for that. A lot of the fees aren't transparent.
Right.
You
Yeah, no,
have to
I've
be
actually been thinking about abandoning ship on my bank lately because suddenly they're charging me $25 a month for savings and for checking. So I'm losing $50 a month in fees just for the privilege of banking with them, right?
Wow.
And I mean, my wife is like, you got to go to the credit union. And it used to be, oh, well, I need to, they have ATMs in every city. I want to be able to use, and that's becoming less and less important. Now I'm looking at those fees and I'm just like, oh, okay. So I'm donating $700 a month a year to you guys.
Yes.
For something that literally a computer is flipping switches. Like, I can barely even see a teller, especially now. And, so what is it exactly they're doing outside of just holding my money? So
they're making money on your money
yeah.
because they're giving you 0.01% and then they're lending it out in a mortgage or in a Visa or in some other thing. And they're earning 18% from some other consumer to use your money that they're paying you nothing on. That's why they have fountains in their lobby.
Right.
Would you?
Well, somebody's got to pay for that.
What
Well,
would
right.
you suggest as a banking solution? I mean, would you credit unions? Where would you put
I like
your
credit
money?
unions. I like credit unions. I'm a member of a credit union and use them for some of the mortgage financing as well as some of the savings. I also have a traditional bank, partly because the business relationship we needed that. But when you're in business banking, if you can combine the business banking relationship with the personal one, you will typically get a better deal. Because as a consumer, you're not attractive to banks unless you're putting big deposits on file. And as soon as you show up with a check with a comma in it, they're going to say, oh, do you want to meet with our advisor who can put you in a fancy this, that, or the other? I think it's okay to diversify a little bit between your institutions. You don't need 7 banks, though. I mean, unless you have so much money that you need the FDIC insurance.
Right.
You're not going to need that. Have one primary bank relationship, maybe a credit union. In terms of the investment spots, I think it's good to have everything housed and aggregated in one place. That doesn't necessarily mean it's all managed by one fund company or one brokerage firm but it means you have visibility to all your information. So whether you use mint.com or Quicken, or you use some other online source, or whether you maintain it yourself, knowing where everything is makes a difference, because otherwise you're looking at all these things in a vacuum. And I think that's what one of the biggest mistakes, and again, one of the questions and one of the things that we walk through in the book is how you build that team of people and how they work together. It's real important for your advisors to know what one another are doing. And it's simple examples. Ryan, you talked about your CPA relationship. Well, if you've got an investment relationship and a tax relationship and the two of them aren't working together at all, then the planning your CPA wanted you to do might be totally different than the outcome you get on capital gains or taxable income from your investment advisor. They're in conflict when they could be working together.
Isn't that part of the reason you're firing your current relationship? Is they
Yeah,
put you
I mean,
in a bind?
largely it was, as I started to say, me not being the most assertive business guy of all time. I need a CPA that'll kind of have my back a little bit and make some suggestions. And hey, I see you going off the rails here. Would you mind, what if we did this? Or, I just need somebody that's actually invested in what I'm doing. And I had a great guy like that when I lived in Idaho, in a different state. But when we moved to Utah, we found a CPA that was licensed here in Utah, and and it just hadn't gone as well. And
most of the time, you don't need a CPA in your home state. You do want to have an estate attorney in your own state because the bar exam doesn't transfer. But in a lot of cases, financial advisors and CPAs can work anywhere.
Okay.
It's not a state licensed thing. The legal is. So, when you move to Utah, hopefully you also got new wills and new powers of attorney and new medical
Yeah,
directives.
well, and like we re-registered the business here in Utah and took it out of Idaho and things like that. So
so
there was
there's
some
business
like
things and estate things that's different, and that is state specific. And so that matters. But you also want your attorney and your insurance agent to know one another or to work together, because your insurance agent and even your HR department at work or the benefits people or whoever you're doing if you're self-employed, like you are, your business, you're choosing your own benefits, you're running them through your own third-party administrator. They have to communicate with your attorney. Your attorney has to be able to say, Ryan, here's who you need to name as beneficiaries, because you will wildly screw this up if you don't. And if your insurance agent names one person and the will names something else, it'll never reach the will. You could have the most perfect will in the world. If the beneficiary designation says, I'm leaving this to my ex-wife, it's going to your ex-wife. I don't even know if you have an ex-wife, but if you do, you don't necessarily want that.
Right. No, I think that makes a lot of sense. So to think about things sort of practically then, so we've shelled aside some money for easy math. We'll call it 10 grand. So we've got 10 grand. We have chosen the right bank accounts based on what we think we want. Maybe we want to save for a home. We want to set a little money aside for retirement, that emergency fund we talked about. And then I don't know, some play money, let's say. Maybe we want to save for a vacation or something. So how do you take this money, this lump of cash that you've been able to set aside, and properly, I guess, put that into these places to make sure that we're sort of serving everything? I mean, you mentioned sort of having some, different types of things that we're doing, so that maybe one is I don't know, and this will be me speaking as a novice, but something going into like an aggressive kind of, maybe we've got some stocks and bonds type money, and maybe we've got some IRA money, and then maybe we've got some, I mean, like how would we actually take that lump of cash and get it put it to work today? Is it better to put it all on black and go spin it? Or is it better is there something else we should be
Absolutely not, because you have less than a 50-50 shot. And if you play long enough, you must lose. That's why casinos have fountains in their lobbies, just like the banks do. So the short answer is, when you're just beginning, there are tools and resources that are elegant and easy. They aren't always inexpensive, but they're elegant and easy to help people start. Things like target retirement funds. A fund that says my target retirement is 2055. I'm going to be in the 2055 fund, and it will begin more aggressively as I'm younger. And as I get older, it'll adjust automatically for me. It's a great way to start. I think that's so much better than trying to pick individual stocks or to pick an individual anything. Start with a fund or a series of funds that are built for people your age and your situation. And they exist, and there's timers on them. I mean, if you say, I'm going to use this money in 2055, every investment firm you can name has a target 2055 fund. And they're all a little different, but when you're first getting started, those nuances aren't going to matter a lot. If you have a ton of money, you better look at at it very, very differently. But when you're first getting started, the more important thing is the behavior. It's the habit. It's the adding $50 a month to it is more important than what it's in.
Okay. And do you think, is it better than to, let's say, take that whole wad of 10 grand and throw it at a fund like this to get started? Or is it better to sort of differentiate that a little bit? Maybe 5 grand goes into retirement, but like, how do we prioritize, I guess, what's important, right? I mean, speaking of, a non-traditional version of retirement, I've always had this attitude. My father passed away very young. And so I've always had this attitude that, the death's around the corner. Like, I'm just not going to make it to 65. Now that may be true. Hopefully I'm not thinking that much as often anymore, much more aspirational for higher hopes. But nonetheless, if, putting it off till 65 feels like you're not living life, while you're younger, or maybe you do want to be able to buy a home, or you want to be able to do some of these things and use that as your retirement. Maybe, is there other ways of investing that, I guess, make fiscal sense that aren't just sort of being reckless with money?
Well, there's lots of different ways to answer that question too. The recklessness of an investment really has nothing to do with the type of account it's in necessarily. It has to do with how aggressive or how speculative or how volatile is what you're buying. And you mentioned, should we buy this fund or an IRA or those kinds of things? The reality is, an IRA is just a type of account. It can own the same fund that you would own outside of the IRA. It's just a type of account. It's a tax wrapper. And so when you talk about how do we prioritize, the $1 million question, of course, is how long am I going to live? And I'm going to be healthy, and things we can't answer, right? There's no crystal ball. I have seen too many people who save every darn penny and never spend it. And it's for the cruise they're going to take when they're 70, and at 69, they drop dead. And that's not living. I've seen other people who take that cruise every year and they don't care hell or high water. And then they get to a point where they can't earn money anymore and they become wards of the state. Also not a good scenario. I think there's a seesaw here. There's a balance to strike. And I think it's different. The three of us on this conversation, we're all going to have a different balance based on what our priorities are, or how we feel about those things, or what other resources we have. What's your earning capacity? You know, Ryan, well, I'm sorry, for people who are on a fixed salary, it's totally different than for people who could work more and therefore be paid more. If you're freelancing, if you have a side hustle and you have the ability to make an extra 5 or 10 grand because you feel like it, then you can treat that pendulum a little differently than if you're on a straight salary and you're going to get a cost of living bump maybe, and that's it.
Sure.
Well, your cost of just getting by day to day, your monthly expenses is pretty much what determines your cash flow. Like if you spend $3,000 a month in bills and expenses and rent and mortgage and all that, and you make $4,000, then you're positive $1,000 every month. It's just basic math, isn't it, for the most part?
Well,
So
you're positive $1,000 every month if you take that grand and put it away first.
Yeah.
Because otherwise it's still sitting there and you're going to be inclined to try this or click that. I mean, Amazon's so easy. All you have to do is think something up and somehow it's there and it shows up. So I think the consumerism is tough. You want to put some money where you can't get to it easily. Not that you can't have it, it's your money, but put it where it's not going to be available by the ATM, or it's not going to be sitting on the counter and just available to you. One of the things about retirement plans that make them so powerful is that they do have restrictions in terms of when you can use them. And it's really, in some ways, for your own good. Because you can borrow, employees can borrow against 401ks and take loans, and they're horrendous. No one should ever borrow against a 401k. And sometimes you don't have a choice. And that's the reality. Life happens, and sometimes you don't have a choice. But if you've got a choice, if you've got 3 or 4 or 5 different options, places to go to get money, that's the only thing more expensive there is going to a loan shark or a check cashing booth.
50% interest.
Yeah. What's the VIG? I mean, that's not. That's
my arm or my leg.
Yeah, or one of each.
Right. So we're starting to get towards the end of this thing, and I wondered if you wouldn't talk a little bit, or let us hear some of your thoughts. Sort of, like now we're sort of going through these, interesting pandemic times. We've got a lot of people who are out of work, and or maybe living off unemployment, things like this, and just trying to make things work, right? Like, I mean, obviously this isn't an extreme case. Maybe it won't be like this for long. But do you have any advice for how to be smart during these times, or is it fine to just kind of tread water and try and survive until you can get gainfully employed again?
I think there are plenty of people who need to tread water. The recovery here. You have all the talk about, is it a U, is it a V, is it a W? It's a K. This is a K-shaped recovery, which has never happened before. And what that means is you've got one group of people who have gotten incredibly wealthy during this stretch because they didn't lose their job, because they didn't get sick or have a loved one die, and because they participated in an economy that was incredibly resilient, and they've made a ton of money. Like, the rich got richer during this pandemic so far. And then you have the folks who were 1 or 2 missed paychecks from a real serious problem, who then lost those paychecks. Yeah. And there's a great deal of gray in between, but those are the sort of the 2 extremes. And so I think if you're in a position where this has created either, of course, the health issues or financial issues, if there's a period of unemployment, if there's a period of underemployment, I mean, a lot of people went back to work, but it's not what they were used to. I think right now is a time to just hang in, try not to get into a hole you can't get out of, avoid every unnecessary expense you can temporarily. Figure out what your side hustle is going to be if you're able, even if it's before you found a job. Do something. Because the longer you're unemployed, the less likely it is you'll get employed.
So I don't know if you've listened to enough of our episodes to know what I do for work, but it's obvious behind me. I'm a DJ.
Mhm.
I play music for people to dance and have fun and gather and associate with. And COVID has knocked me on my ass. Like I've
Sure.
gone from last summer was going to be my best year to date income of all
Mhm.
time, and it decimated that.
Yeah.
All of it went
Yeah.
down the tubes, and it actually ended up pushing most of those events to next summer. So it's wiping out 2 years of my income um, from COVID, and it's one of those things where I've been lucky. I've been able to get by. I've had friends where I went up to Alaska and did construction work. And I've been able to pay my bills, but, and actually right now I could go back to work. There's a venue here in Idaho that would hire me and I could go work Friday and Saturday nights and I could have income coming in, but I don't feel that I should. I feel that it's, we're in the middle of a pandemic. I shouldn't be playing in a nightclub and getting people
Mhm.
together dancing. It just is wrong, in my opinion. And so I am intentionally taking it slow and I'm just
Mhm.
pinching every penny I have and just, eating top ramen as much as I can just to get by. But this has really set me back on my 10-year plan. I literally had savings built up. I had bought some equipment for the business in December before the
Mhm.
pandemic hit, spent like $8,000 worth of my savings to buy equipment that I haven't been able to use at all. And so it's been a really hard year. And, I'm kind of, you know, wondering what the hell's going to happen next. And hopefully, with the talk of a vaccine coming, I will have gigs next summer that I can actually start making an income again. And it's one of these things where something like this that makes you realize how fragile your life is and your job. And it's like I could be framing houses next month again. It's like one of those things that is just crazy. And financial freedom is kind of like it's a pipe dream at this point right now. And it sucks to be at the age I am right now, thinking I'm going to have to go and sell all my gear for pennies on the dollar just to get by. But it is what it is. And, I've been looking for truck driving jobs just so that I can go and have some stable income so I can start saving to buy a house. It's like,
Right.
it's horrible. What
The-
would you say for someone in my shoes?
um,
I'm literally living it right now.
well, first of all, I would say kudos to you for being industrious enough to find ways to do that, whether it's Alaska or whether it's trucking or other things. Secondly, I do believe that we will get back to some semblance of normalcy, or what we think was normal. I'm certainly not a doctor, and I have no idea when the vaccine will come, but there will be one, and there will be other things like this. There were people who were 58 years old in 2008 who were planning to retire in 2 or 3 or 5 years, who 10 years later
Lost everything.
still can't.
Yeah.
So each of these types of things hits different groups of people disproportionately. And because of what you do for a living, you're disproportionately hurt by the fact that you can't go do gigs. I do believe there will be a pent up demand for what you do.
There probably will be.
And I can't dance worth a damn, but if you've got karaoke, I'll sing with anybody. There will be some pent up demand. There will also be some folks who just never return to that. I mean, be glad you don't run a cruise line or or an airline,
Yeah.
because people who own rental real estate. I'm sure you have a ton of listeners who are thinking, I want to buy rental properties and I want to do this. We know people who own those rental properties who aren't collecting rent because their tenants are in a situation like yours. They just aren't paying them. You can't even evict someone right now.
Yeah.
So you've got one group of folks out screaming, cancel rent, and the other folks saying, hey, wait a minute, I bought this house. If I don't have the rent, I can't pay my own mortgage. I'm going to be decimated too. Like, everybody's losing on the deal in that regard. And it's a real complicated problem. We have seen, I think, a complete lack of leadership at almost every level. for an extended period of time. And that's not a political statement so much as a reality that there's no blueprint for this. None of us, I was in Fort Lauderdale the early part of March. I used to be a road warrior. I was on planes twice a week at least. And I went from, I was in Fort Lauderdale thinking, what is this? Are they really going to postpone flights for a week or something? And now, now our fifth grader had to learn how to do some homeschool, and we had to I've got employees. We closed the office for 6 weeks. We had people working from home. We're lucky we can do our jobs from home. So I think the only answer I can give you is don't ever give up your optimism. Seriously, because without that, you're sort of doomed to that prophecy. Maintain your optimism. Recognize that there will be a demand for what you do. People love music. They love to congregate. They love to party. They love to dance. Some do. I don't. And there will
Yeah,
be.
I don't either. That's why I DJ. I can't dance to
I
solo.
love music. I can't. Somebody could get hurt if I was dancing nearby. There will be a demand for what you do. There are some industries that will not recover from this at all. If you owned a shopping center, retail was already in trouble, and now it may be truly doomed. Malls, who wants to go to a mall?
Yeah.
So,
Well, especially as they become more and more empty.
Right. And that's the other thing. What's happening to populations? There's population shift. The big cities are not as attractive a place to live as some people believe they were a year ago.
Mm-hmm.
You don't want to be in a 48-story high-rise necessarily apartment right now trying to deal with the elevators when everybody's stuck home.
Right. Well, and you look at places like Los Angeles and New York specifically. The exodus of people leaving, and maybe it was kind of long overdue, for tax reasons or just, sheer numbers of people reasons. But yeah, you're seeing like a wild exodus. We live out here in the West, and I'm in Utah and Mike's in Idaho. And it's a steady barrage of Californians moving out this way.
Well, and that's going to affect a lot of things. It affects transportation. It affects the entire population has to be ready to handle it, whether it's dining, whether it's roadways, whether it's infrastructure, sewer. If there's going to be a building boom, you're going to feel some of that. And it also shifts the voting blocks too. It shifts populations in really interesting ways. When all of a sudden there's an exodus from California to Arizona, it changes Arizona.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. And you saw that in Texas looking much more blue this year than maybe ever.
Yeah.
And, a lot of Californians heading to Texas and then voting as Californians do.
And some of that, let's circle back. We talked about tax arbitrage. We talked about when you do the Roth versus the traditional. You want the deduction in the high when it's expensive, but you want to have income come when it's not expensive. People are doing that in high tax states. They're working in an area that has high incomes, and they're making tax deductible contributions to things. And then they're moving to states with no income tax and taking money out and not paying taxes on it. They're double dipping. Right. And there's nothing illegal about it. In fact, it's smart. But we've seen people here. I'm in Maryland, and we have folks here. The exodus from here goes directly to Naples, Florida. And so we see people who what they pay in state income tax here, just for the privilege of being here, is more than what it would cost to buy a condo on the beach in Boca or in Naples. It's like getting a free house by not paying taxes.
Well, I know my sister lives in Rochester. Her property tax on her house is almost as much as her mortgage payment. And it's just ridiculous to me. It's mind-boggling to me that that's even a thing.
Oh, it's a thing. There are people who work their whole lives to pay their houses off who lose their houses because they can't afford the tax bill.
That's insanity.
That is not okay. It's not okay. And there's so much variety in the way to do that. And there is a complete disconnect between the folks who are making the rules and the folks who have to be subjected to them. And that's true at every level on everything. That's true when Congress passes something for Social Security in which they don't participate, or healthcare mandates in plans they don't participate in. Literally passing laws that only apply to other people. That's horrifying.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's true. Well, I think, as we're sort of getting to the end here, I think honestly we could go on forever. I mean, this is a really deep topic, and there's so many things that I'd love to cover. Just, if only for me personally. I know Mike has lots of questions for himself personally too. And so this is, and Mike seems to be a much smarter with money guy than me, because he at least has some experience in the real estate and finance and some of that stuff. And I've just never touched any of it. I draw pictures, man. That's my thing. So
and I draw stick figures.
See, so we all have our spot.
Yeah.
So, but I wonder if you wouldn't just sort of tell people where they can learn more about what you do, how they can
get
with
your
you
book,
or engage with you, where they can buy the book, that sort of thing.
The book is at Amazon. It's Don't Retire, Graduate. If you look up Eric,
Well, that was before you said something about Amazon. Now,
listen, I use Amazon all the time. I love Amazon.
Oh, you better believe they're checking your records now, just to be sure.
Well, it's funny. There are 2 Eric Brotmans on Amazon who write books. I write books about personal finance. The other Eric Brotman is a PhD who writes books on how to toilet train cats. You can't make that up. I'm not that guy. Don't, maybe buy his book too, but Don't Retire, Graduate.
To start writing those books.
Available online. And then, we talk so much about taxes and we didn't get into really some of the nuts and bolts, but I published an ebook that's free for download at lowtaxbook.com. And anyone interested in doing that, it's a way to learn the 4 places that most Americans can put money where it's never taxed again. And it's a big deal. We've gotten a lot of traction from that, and a lot of people have changed the way they look at savings and investing as a result.
Great.
Well, Eric, thank you so much for making the time for us. I really enjoyed this conversation and learned a lot. And I'm going to be listening to your podcast and subscribing.
I'm delighted, and I'm enthusiastic about yours as well. You've had some really interesting guests on your show, and I'm glad to be one of them. Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, thanks so much, Eric. And thanks to everybody who tunes in this week and every week. And we'll see you all next time.